Good evening, everyone. My name is Heather Rose, and on behalf of the Geelong Regional Library Corporation, I'd like to welcome you to the library's author online event this evening. The Geelong Regional Library Corporation acknowledges the Wadawurrung people and the Eastern Maar original owners of the land on which our library services operate. We pay our respects to the Wadawurrung and Eastern Maar elders past, present and emerging. We acknowledge and celebrate First Nations peoples of this land as the custodians of learning, literacy, knowledge and story. Tonight, I am coming to you from the beautiful island of Lutruwita, more recently known as Tasmania, where my home is on the shores of the River Derwent. The lands of the Muanina people and the Mumiramina people are here on either sides of the Derwent River, and their spirit is tangible still today. I acknowledge the pain and suffering the people of my culture caused the old people of these islands, and I pay my deepest respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Now, some housekeeping reminders. You can participate in this live webinar by clicking on the Q&A button and typing your question or comment, and that's the only way we can interact with you tonight. So please use the Q&A button. You'll find it on the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you will also find that if you're using an iPad or an iPhone tonight. So please use the Q&A, and I will visit the Q&A about 10-15 minutes before the end of this session so that we have a chance to listen to Chris answer your questions. Also, this webinar is being recorded. If you'd like to watch this discussion again or recommend to friends or family to watch it, it will be uploaded to the library's YouTube channel within the next couple of days. So come back to the library's YouTube channel probably by the weekend or possibly Monday, and it will be available for you. So before we begin, a little bit of background about myself. I'm Heather Rose, of course. I am the author of 8 novels, the latest being Bruni, which is a political thriller and family saga and love story set here in Tasmania with global themes that are playing out as we speak. The tussle for power between America and China and the effect that has on Australia. My previous novels include The Museum of Modern Love, which won the 2017 Stella Prize, and The Butterfly Man, which won the Davitt Award many years ago for the best crime fiction novel by an Australian woman. And it is now my very great pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, one of the stars of Australian fiction and a really extraordinary writer of crime fiction, Chris Hammer, to talk about his new book, Trust. So let me tell you a little bit about Chris. He is a leading Australian crime fiction novelist, obviously. He's the author of the international bestsellers Scrublands and Silver, such brilliant books. And of course, Trust is the third and supposedly final book in the series. His book Scrublands was an instant bestseller in 2018 here in Australia and was shortlisted for major writing awards in Australia, the UK and the United States. In the UK, it was named the Sunday Times Crime Novel of the Year in 2019, such an extraordinary honour for an Australian writer. It's incredibly hard to get even published in the UK if you're an Australian writer, let alone win the Sunday Times Crime Novel of the Year amongst those crime writers. And it also won the prestigious UK Crime Writers Association John Creasy New Blood Dagger Award. Scrublands, Silver and Trust all feature troubled journalist Martin Scarsden and his partner, the gorgeous Mandalay Blonde. Together they have sold over 300,000 copies internationally and counting. Before turning to fiction, Chris was a journalist for more than 30 years. He reported from more than 30 countries on 6 continents for SBS TV. In Canberra, roles included chief political correspondent for The Bulletin, senior writer for The Age, and online political editor for The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. Chris has written 2 non-fiction books, The River and The Coast, published by Melbourne University Press. So, of course, we are here to talk about trust. So welcome, Chris. It's lovely to see you there. I know that you're in Canberra. How's the weather?
Oh, it's wet. It's been really wet. The drought's gone. All the dams are full. It looks like Kent. It's fantastic. I should take the opportunity to pay my respects to the traditional owners here, the Ngunnawal people of the Ngambri lands, and acknowledge my respect for their elders, past, present, and emerging. So Canberra's very good, very good. Nice.
And Chris, would you like to tell us, first of all, can you frame trust for us? Tell us all about this wonderful, wonderful third in this series. I'm really hoping there's going to be another one. I'm hoping it's not the last one. Tell us about what we discover as we begin this story and how the story unfolds.
Okay. Someone has declared it's the final in the series, but that wasn't me. I've got to say right now.
Oh, so relieved.
I am hoping that Martin and Mandy will be back. How they come back and when they come back, I'm not so sure. This book emerged from the writing of Scrublands and Silver. Scrublands, I set off pretty much just to write the best crime book I could. And at that stage, I was thinking it was all about the plot, but I was kind of learning on the job, and I quickly realized that there's a lot more to a good crime book than simply the plot. Character is very important, setting is very important. And the other thing that emerged in the writing of Scrublands was the emotional journey of Martin Scarsden, the damaged journalist, the protagonist that we follow through the story. And he grows and develops and evolves. And by the end, he's a different person. So as I was finishing Scrublands, that made me think more about Martin. And so Silver, the follow-up book, takes Martin back to his old hometown, where he needs to confront the traumatic events that befell him and his family when he was a kid. In fact, he has to find out the truth behind what happened there. And so once again, there's this kind of emotional story. And then as I was finishing that, it occurred to me that we don't really know that much about Mandy's past, or rather, there's a big gap in her past. We know she grew up in the town where Scrublands are set and left after she's, pretty much at the end of school. And we know that she returned there when she was about 28. So there's this 10-year gap. And I was thinking, well, what happened? And I thought, well, if she was running away from a terrible childhood in a little country town, she wouldn't be going off to another little country town. I thought she'd run away to the city. And so Trust is set in Sydney. I didn't think I'd try and make up a fictional city on the east coast of Australia. The first 2 books, of course, are set in fictional towns. And then I was thinking, well, what could have happened to her that has bent her a bit out of shape? Things that she doesn't know, things that she's in denial of to such an extent she still hasn't told Martin about them, hence the title Trust. And because it's a big city, the story is about big city issues, if you like. There's crime, there's corruption, there's organised crime, there's property development, there's casinos, there's crooked politicians. So less bush and more noir, I think.
Nicely put. That should go on a t-shirt. I like that. Yeah, fantastic. And I've asked Chris to abridge the prologue, which is a little bit long for this session. Otherwise, we won't have time for enough questions. But I've asked Chris if he would abridge the prologue a little bit to give us a sense of the flavour of this wonderful novel and how it begins, because we almost instantly come across, first of all, obviously a very pivotal character, But then we meet one of the most vivid, wonderful, enigmatic characters that I've discovered in, I'll never forget him. So could you read for us?
Okay. I shall, but first I'm going to give you a bit more backgrounding. The first thing I would say is, although it's the third in the series, Trust can absolutely be read as a standalone. I've been really pleased by the feedback from people who have read it as a standalone. It's made them want to go back and read Scrublands and Silver, but it's not a problem. The story, though, and the structure of the book is different than the previous two, because in the previous two, we follow Martin very closely. It's not told in the first person, but very close to it, so that he's in every scene. He's the person who leads us through the story, and we can read what Martin is thinking, but we only have his impressions of what other people are thinking. This one's a bit different because I was thinking, well, Martin can't tell Mandy's story for her. And then I thought, I'll flip it. I'll just tell the whole story from Mandy's point of view. In the end, I've settled on 2 points of view, and it pretty much alternates. One chapter from Martin, another chapter from Mandy, which has the unintended but very welcome effect of picking up the pace of the book. So it sort of builds to a crescendo, right? So the entire book is told either from Martin's point of view or Mandy's point of view, except for the prologue. And this, as you find out pretty quickly, details events that have taken 5 years before, around 5 years before, when Mandy was living in Sydney. Okay. And it tells the tale of a guy called Tarquin Malloy, and he's on the trading floor of a bank and he's stealing information. That's pretty much all we know. So I'll pick it up. The trading floor is a hive of activity. Brokers swarming, abuzz with corporate fervour and personal ambition. Banks of monitors alive with bonds and equities and derivatives and exchange rates, all fluid, all flickering, all demanding their attention. Simply by standing still, he's rendered himself invisible. No one is looking at him and no one cares about his monitor. They're all focused on their own ephemera, numbers and charts and transactions, losses, margins and gains. He feels he is the only point of stillness, the cyclone swirling about him, that he alone possesses the perspective to know what is truly happening across these epochal seconds. It completes his victory, carried out in plain sight, the audacity of it, his own subterfuge disguised by the bank's own much larger deception. The transfer is almost done. He lifts the coffee. It tastes excellent. Through the windows of the office tower, he can see the perfect Sydney day, blue and white, the sun pouring benevolence across the skyline, harbour alight as if the city itself approves the righteousness of his actions. He looks back to the computer, startled to see it's finished. Already, he blinks, savouring the moment, this tipping point, this culmination. If nothing else, he'll miss the bank's state-of-the-art tech, so much faster and more efficient than the antiquated systems at his real workplace. He sits, quickly he imposes his own encryption on the thumb drive, then runs a purpose-built program to cover his tracks. It takes mere minutes. Then he ejects the drive, pockets it and logs off, done. Okay, we move forward a little bit now. He enters the lift, hits the button for the lobby for glory, taking one last look across the trading floor as the doors begin to close, the curtains falling on the final scene. He commits it to memory for the recounting. Then, at the last, an arm reaches in, forcing the doors open. Tarquin Malloy beams at the newcomer, a tall man, thin and dressed in a vintage suit of coarse brown wool. The doors are shut. Morning, says the gentleman, inviting engagement. It certainly is, he replies. And to Tarquin, he does look like a gentleman. The suit is three-piece, of heavy cloth, as if it's been transported from somewhere in the mid-20th century, immaculately maintained despite its age. There is a patterned kerchief in the suit's breast pocket and a legacy badge on its lapel. The man's face is long, as is his hair, oiled so it stays in place behind his ears. That hair oil or something has a pleasant aroma in the confined space. The smell, like the suit and the man's demeanour, is old-fashioned. His complexion is touched with sepia. A smoker, thinks Tarquin. Old for a trading floor. California poppy, says the man. Sorry? The hair oil, California poppy. It smells very nice. Thank you, says the man genially. One of his teeth has a gold cap. It's hard to come by nowadays. The lift shudders to a halt, but the doors don't open. They're stuck between floors. That's strange, says Tarquin. You don't know the half of it, says the man in the brown suit. He unbuttons his coat and withdraws a revolver, a 6-gun, a prop from a Western, a massive thing, matte black and menacing, its handle inlaid with pearl shell. Tarquin's stomach plummets and his mind begins to reel. The muzzle is pointed at his chest. And that's it. I think you're muted, Heather.
Sorry, bravo, Chris. Thank you so much. That's just delightful. Enter Henry Livingston. So tell me, you mentioned the beauty of understanding that there's so much to writing crime. There's character, there's place, there's pace. But I love your characters. Your characters are so rich. And of course, one of the beauties of for those of us who've read the series is finding these characters, not just Mandalay and Martin, of course, and Liam, but other characters that occur and come back to visit us and unexpectedly, which is so wonderful. And I love that. So, but then there are new characters. What inspired Henry Livingston? He seems so particular.
I wanted, right from the start, my attitude towards characters is I don't like them to be black or white. I didn't want like a bunch of good guys versus a bunch of bad guys. So even Martin and Mandy have their shortcomings, let us say. Martin is not beyond cutting a few ethical corners, particularly when it comes to, getting the big newspaper story. And so with the bad guys, if you like, it's good to make them a bit more complex. So you have some sympathy for them. You have some understanding about what's motivating them. And sometimes they just start almost like a plot point. Martin needs to find out something. He's going to meet someone who's going to give him some information. So it's purely transactional. But here's an opportunity. Why not make that person interesting? Why not make them, sinister or amusing? Why not make them a buffoon or do something interesting with them? And then what I find what happens is with some of them, they take on a little bit of a life of their own. So maybe they've just been started off as a plot point, but then later on, as I'm progressing through the narrative, they sort of knock on the door and want to come back in and tell Martin something else or something like that. And so they grow. And so what the little seed or kernel for Henry was, I don't really know. I should probably take notes as I write, because this happens all the time. I get asked to unpack the books and it's like, oh yeah, what was I thinking?
It's a funny experience like that, isn't it? It's an intuitive process in so many ways. And yeah. So the other lovely character in this book, Trust, is Sydney itself. And she's not the glittering turquoise tourism Sydney at all. So tell us about the Sydney that this story reveals. And I know you've mentioned, you know, the institutional corruption, which we'll get to, but tell us about what inspired you to share a Sydney that, you know, for those of us who visit regularly, we see that, but for those who come fleetingly or simply see the photographs or watch the films, they may not see.
Yeah, so having decided that this would be set in a city and deciding I would have to use a real city, that it would just be artificial to try and invent a city. I decided on Sydney, but there's no compulsion, of course, to describe it impartially or accurately. And if you think of all the books that you read that are set in New York or London or Melbourne for that matter, they're all taking a sort of impressionistic take. I mean, the New York of the Great Gatsby is not the same as the Bonfire of the Vanities or you know, Fleischman in Trouble or whatever, right? So I decided that I would confine it to some extent. So this book, like the others, does have a map in it in the front, which I'm holding up. It's not detailed, but pretty much all the action takes part within a few square kilometers. There's nothing on the North Shore. There's nothing on the beaches. There's nothing on the harbour. There's nothing in the western suburbs. And it's also in a confined space of time as well. But the Sydney is kind of a grim place. It's almost, Martin every now and then catches a glimpse of the beautiful harbour city, but it's almost like it's been denied him. The other thing that then came as I was writing it, I finished it, I polished as much as I could and gave it to the publishers in about end of February this year. There's quite a long lead time between writing and the final published product. And as I was writing, these stories were emerging from China about this mystery virus that was killing people there. And then I gave the manuscript, and then within weeks, we're all in lockdown, right? And it was like, my God, what do I do now? Can I just avoid COVID? Which was my first initial idea, knowing that readers would accept that. The trouble is that in the book, there's a lot of references back to the bushfires of last summer. And I was thinking, how could I have a book that's continually referencing one disaster and completely ignoring another? So in the so COVID is included, but it's only referenced every now and then slightly. And I moved the time frame of the book forward, so we're in a post-COVID world. I don't say what's happened, whether it's a vaccine or a miracle treatment, or you know, we're still in some sort of border shut situation. But it actually fits in well with the book, because although the disease isn't about, the after effects certainly are. So businesses are shut, there's a kind of a recession, there's unemployment, and it just sort of adds quite well into the sort of this more noirish Sydney. And also it feeds into the sort of some of the reactions towards attitudes towards, say, Mandy and Martin. At one point, someone says to Mandy, look, it's all right for you. You've got tons of money and you live up on the North Coast and you've just been isolated away, you know, living the life of Riley. You know, it's been different for us. So it all sort of, fortunately for me, it sort of added to rather than detracted from the existing book. And hence we're left with this Sydney that is a rather dour and unforgiving place.
I really admired the way you just brushed those little moments in being in to some extent, a post-pandemic world, because reading it, I was so relieved to think, yes, it is going to happen. We are actually going to have life beyond this strange time. So
yes, fingers crossed.
Yeah. No, I applauded the way you did that. You did it well. You're an excellent writer, and you did it with such lovely subtlety. But as you say, it created this deeper tapestry. And I know you have lived in Sydney. Yes, you've spent some time as a resident of Sydney, but not very long.
No, there was one comment recently I saw that says, Hammer described Sydney as only a native could, which I took as a great compliment because I haven't lived there for about 25 years. And I lived there for a couple of years in the 80s and a couple of years in the 90s. But I live in Canberra, so it's just up the road. I go there all the time. In fact, I'm heading there tomorrow. But that was one other problem with COVID. I'd written a story, and going into this editing thing, there was a few locations I still wanted to check out.
Oh.
And I was planning to go back, so I could revise the narrative. And then lockdown happened and I couldn't get to Sydney for a couple of months. So I used a bit of Google Street View to check out different places. So, but as I say, it's an impressionistic Sydney.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's really wonderful. As a Tasmanian, I always imagine when I go to Sydney that, it'll be warm and I'll need very little clothing. And then I turn up and that breeze is coming down through the streets and I always underdress for Sydney. And
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about corruption in this book. I mean, of course, this has been quite a topical issue in recent times with our current federal and New South Wales government. And I did find myself laughing, especially at the end when we get a certain list of certain establishments that, very well-heeled and well-connected people belong to. And I really admired your audaciousness. I felt that I was really commending you. So tell me, did you have a lot of fun writing Trust?
Yes, and I had a lot of fun writing Scrublands and Silver as well. I think if we're enjoying writing it as the author, there's a good chance that readers are going to enjoy it. And if you're emotionally engaged with your characters as the author, I think, once again, the readers, I think a lot of readers really want an emotional connection to the characters. So I think you really need to have that as a writer as well. And I think with issues like, corruption or whatever, you don't want to become didactic. You don't want to start lecturing people. It's a fiction. There's the impression if it inspires some, thought amongst the reader, well, fine. If it doesn't, fine too. But talking about corruption, so there's an idea about in this book, there's a planned casino development and there's allegations of corruption. Well, that's one of today's news stories that have been subsumed, I guess, by the American elections. But as a journalist, there's always these sort of stories and rumours floating around. So just as in Scrublands, there's a storyline there that involves a former SAS soldier accused of committing war crimes. Well, at the time I wrote Scrublands, that wasn't in the news at all, but there were kind of whispers in the background. I thought, oh, that's not a bad idea. I can incorporate that. And, I moved forward 2 or 3 years and it is part of the news. This is one of the great fun bits of writing crime fiction. And you don't have to worry about defamation. You don't have to worry about contempt of court. You don't have to worry about protecting sources. You don't have to worry about any of those things. And what's better, by the end of the book, you can explain everything and tie everything up in a neat knot, which as a journalist, that's a very rare thing to happen. So you're right. I do enjoy sort of, just touching every now and then on some of those points.
Oh, I loved it. And there's a certain bank in this book that has very interesting international connections that I'm sure is completely fictional too, of course.
There's more than $1 trillion laundered around the world every year. I mean, it is massive. And to think that there's no part of that happening through Australia would be naive. In fact, there's some well-funded federal government agencies set up, like Austrac, particularly to chase down those things.
Chris, that brings us quite delightfully to the, it's so evident that you have many skills from your experience as a foreign correspondent and a journalist. Tell us about what helps in that regard from those skills and what's hindered as you've moved into the world of fiction.
Yeah, look, the balance is probably more on the help side than the hinder, particularly when it comes to just to the day-to-day business of writing. A lot of people aspire to be writers, but find the self-discipline difficult. But as a journalist, there's never a question about that. You can't say to your editor, oh, look, I'm not feeling inspired today, I won't file. You just get sacked if you try that one on. And one things I learnt from those years is some days, the days where you actually don't feel like, writing at all, it's often the days when you do your best stuff. So there's that. A little bit of knowledge, I guess, about how the world might work, in the background behind the scenes. But there are some hindrances. There are a lot of journalists who've made extremely good crime writers in particular. So the 3 Australian crime writers who've won the UK Crime Writers Association Gold Dagger Award, which is the big, most prestigious one, Peter Temple, Jane Harper, and Michael Rowbotham has just won it for a second time. All former journalists. Michael Connolly's a former journalist. There's a lot who seem to make the transition well, but there's others who can't. Some, I think it's just they're so used to the daily fix of news, it's hard to work on a project that may extend for a year or two. But some others just can't break away from the journalistic style, to a more storytelling narrative type style. They're locked into that bang, 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 fact, fact, fact style, and it just doesn't read like a story. So many do, some don't. Yeah.
Yes. But I've enjoyed very much this little competition that goes on throughout the series between our hero, Martin Scarsden, and his colleague, Darcy Defoe. And there's a beautiful moment where Martin reflects on his earlier career and says he had tried to buckle under, tried to stick to the facts, keeping his writing as simple as possible, even while Darcy Defoe won praise for his eloquence. That hurt. Was there a Darcy Defoe in your time as a journalist? And did you find when you were a journalist that you urged towards a more eloquent style that, weren't allowed to pursue it? So
I spent most of my time as a journalist as a television journalist. So I'm probably more like Doug Funkelton than Darcy Defoe. And no, there wasn't someone whom I worked with who was, in those years, who was really known as an eloquent writer. I had a reputation of being a good writer, I think. I flatter myself. What it does bring out, though, is it's probably less now, but there was a time, particularly when I worked in the press gallery in Canberra, which I did on and off over about 30 years, this idea that the press gallery and the press sort of act in a unified way, the press pack, and they're all chasing the same story. What the books bring out is there's a lot of competition. It's strange, there's a lot of collegiality, particularly in the press gallery, amongst people from different outlets and whatever. But at the same time, there's this really sort of almost cutthroat competition. And not just with people working for other newspapers and TV stations, but within, say, a newspaper, because you want your story to be on the front page. You're not sabotaging other reporters or anything like that. That'd be it's going too far. In fact, you could always say, hey, do you have a contact number for such and such minister or whatever, and they give it to you, of course. But still, there's this motivation of getting your story up. It sounds at times, I guess, a little infantile, but really there is a lot of competition there. And that comes out a bit in the books, a bit real world, and also it gives a bit of nuance to Martin's character, in that he's just as bad at that sort of thing and as ungracious as the rest of them.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I love your insights to that. It's always wonderful. I mean, there's so many things we have to do to research our novels, as you and I both know. But then those areas that are particular in your background that intimately, that come through in the novel, they're a lot of fun for the reader, because there's just a gravitas and a truthfulness to it that it's hard to research to that level of truthfulness when you observe that.
This is I find this interesting, because I just mentioned the names of all those people before, those really, really accomplished crime writers, but none of them have journalists as protagonists. So, Michael Rowbotham has psychologists, and Peter Temple had Jack Irish, who was a lawyer, and he had police officers, and Jane Harper has police officers. Michael Connelly, the great American crime writer, his main character is Harry Bosch, who's a policeman, and he's got a lawyer, Mickey Haller. He does have a journalist, Jack McAvoy, that pops up. There's the main character in some of his books. But it's always intrigued me that more former journalists don't use journalists as protagonists, because a journalist does have a license to poke their nose in where it's not wanted. It can make it a little bit tricky at times, because they don't necessarily have access to forensic information, and they can't arrest someone and compel them to talk and all of that. But nevertheless, it's not a bad protagonist.
Oh, I mean, I love the versatility that you're given with Martin, I have to say. It's inspiring as a fellow writer to watch how many opportunities a certain character gets because of their profession to do exactly what you've expressed. But I can't help but wonder, of course, and I'm sure many readers do too, if there's not a little bit of Martin in you. And, Martin has... throughout the series, we see Martin go through this quite beautiful, subtle character arc where he's clearly going through a process of some self-healing from, a degree of trauma from the experiences that he's had as a foreign correspondent, one very vivid one in particular. Are there aspects of that time when you're away, when the things you've witnessed, do you notice that some of those qualities come through in Martin?
Yeah, so Martin isn't based on me. Some of his work practices, his attitude to stories or something, maybe. But when I was a sort of roving foreign correspondent, there were times when I would go to conflict zones. Most of the time I wasn't. I was off doing, stories like the state of the Japanese economy, or US presidential elections, or corruption in France or something like that. But the times when I did go to conflict zones and meet the real bona fide war correspondents, boy, some of them were damaged, particularly the young photographers and camera operators, all with PTSD, all self-medicating, drinking, taking drugs. I decided early on that I wouldn't make Martin a boozer, because it would just be too much of a cliche. But apart from that, yeah, he's based on some of those people, and he does come to terms. So when we first meet him, he's has been an accomplished journalist, but he's had a nervous breakdown because of this incident in the Middle East. But really, he starts growing because, one, his relationship with Mandy. By this stage, he's sort of just turned 40, he's 41, but he hasn't had a proper adult relationship. He's had a lot of one-night stands. But then in Silver, he also comes to terms with a real source of trauma, which is what happened to him as a kid. And I do like that by the time we find him in Trust, he has grown a lot. And one of the ways that is shown is his love for Mandy's son. It's kind of like his stepson, not his own biological kid, but he loves this young boy, Liam. So that was what I was saying before about, that was something I discovered, if you like, in writing Scrublands. Here I am sitting down to write this story that's all about plot and murder and who killed who when sort of thing. And somehow what crept in was this sort of personal story of, emotional change. So, and that's what's continued in a way through the 3 books. And that's also why I don't think this will be the final Martin Mandy story. The problem is now is having written 3 books where that's an important strand, alongside all the crime and whatever. I can't really write a book where that isn't part of it, where they're simply just objective, Martin's just doing a newspaper story, because I feel that it might cheat the readers a bit, because they've gotten used to this certain sort of book and this certain sort of story, that if I tried having them simply being objective, it might fall a bit flat, which is why I'm thinking maybe in the next one I'll write something a bit different. And then when I've got a good idea for that sort of emotional story, making up the crimes is actually a lot easier than doing that. So I might come back to that then.
Well, I'm so delighted to know that, because I'm quite attached to them all now, which is fantastic. But when you think about plotting the crime, one of the things I so admire as you go about this process is all the threads you have to bring together, Chris. Do you get a sense early on of whodunit, and do you understand those dynamics, or do you have to go along and sort of discover them for yourself?
Yeah, the latter. I sort of have to discover them. So when I was starting off writing Scrublands, I was thinking, I'll write this crime book. But one of the flaws that some crime books have is, if you guess who the killer is halfway through the book, terrible. But what's even worse is you get to the last 10 pages of the book and the author just drops a whole lot of new information and a new character, and the killer's someone you haven't even heard of before, so you feel cheated. So my way kind of getting around that was I thought I'd have multiple crimes and multiple perpetrators and these different strands, and that way, even if someone guessed one of the strands, if you like, they weren't going to guess them all. And then I realized quite quickly that I could almost guarantee that, because some of the strands I didn't know how they were going to resolve. And with Scrublands, I rewrote the end like really substantially, as in throw out 50,000 words, completely recast the story. I did that twice, and I kind of did it once with Silver, not with Trust. Maybe I'm getting better at it. With Trust, I had an idea of where Mandy's story might finish up, that emotional story, but I didn't know how she was going to get there. I had the start, the setup, and then how it would be resolved. But what happened in between, I didn't know. And some of the crime elements, I kind of think I know where it's going, but then as I'm writing, I get a better idea. And so if you get a better idea, why wouldn't you go with that? And if I went back through some of the books, Scrubland, Silver, and Trust, you would have characters who end up in the finished book being quite positive sort of people, goodies, if you like, but in earlier drafts are real baddies. So it does shift and change. It's a little bit. Sometimes, there are days, as you well know, Heather, where you sit and you stare at the screen and you can't work out what's wrong, what's not working. You can't write. You end up going for a walk, whatever, trying to think it through. And then there's these other days that are kind of, they're few and far between, but it's almost like you're channeling the story. It's writing itself. You're just the typist. And it's like you can't wait to get that to your keyboards because you want to find out what happens. So it's almost like you're the reader rather than the writer. I wish there were more days like that.
Isn't that true? In fact, I found a beautiful quote from the wonderful Jewish writer David Grossman from Israel, and he wrote this beautiful, beautiful book of essays called "Writing in the Dark." They're about politics and literature, and they're fascinating. But he wrote this quote: "To write a novel is to some extent to be responsible for a few dozen characters. No one will volunteer to write them for us. Sometimes I like to think of them, sometimes I liken them to a person who is hiding a huge family, several dozen strong, in the cellar of his house during a war. This person must go down to the cellar at least once a day to bring food and water to the people." And I thought about that with all your characters, because you have such a rich cast of characters in all your novels, and it's just a delight to discover them and to watch you do it book after book. It's really one of the things I most look forward to when I read you. So thank you for all the days that, you know, it goes well and all the days it's just the hard yakka, and for making it a great discovery for us. I think that's partly why it always is such a discovery, because it's clearly a discovery for you too.
It is. Look, I really like that sort of image he has of having to go to the cellar every day to sort of feed them and look after them and whatever. And I do get a question, and I'm sure you get this all the time from aspiring writers, this question about, do you write every day? And I pretty much do write every day. And most of the time the reaction to that, or often the reaction to that, is, wow, that's amazing self-discipline. I wish I had that self-discipline. But the reality is that it's not self-discipline. It's more like I'm addicted to writing, and I want to look after the characters. I want to find out what's happening to them. And so if I have days where I don't write, I think it's a little bit like someone who's addicted to jogging or walking or coffee or whatever. It doesn't feel quite right. I want to go back and find out what's going on. I want to find out that they're okay, etc., etc. So it's a different, you know, it's a different mindset than many people think, and it's a different mindset that I used to think. I used to think the same thing. You had to sort of, you know, it was all about self-discipline, whereas actually a lot of it's about just enjoyment and just being addicted to the fun of it.
I absolutely. And isn't that delightful? When did you, I'm going to go to questions in a couple of moments, but when did you first really fall in love with words and stories? What were those initial sort of moments of going, aha, this is something I could do with my life?
Well, there's different stages. As a kid, I grew up in a house full of books. I've got an elder brother and elder sister. And they used to read books, and they liked reading books. And so I couldn't wait to read books. And so I was quite precocious and learnt to read early. And I always loved reading. That was the first step. Writing was more difficult. I had the idea, I think, in my 20s and when I was at uni, how great it would be to be a writer. So I liked the idea of being a writer. I just didn't like the idea of writing, in that I had the attention span of a gnat. That was why journalism suited me so much, daily journalism, particularly in television. You arrive at work, you don't even know what story you're going to do. And by the end of the day, you've done it, it's been to air, and you're free. And that sort of suited my mindscape. Later on, though, when I was able to do longer pieces of journalism, which had more room then for some nice writing, I enjoyed that. And then I wrote 2 non-fiction books. Mm-hmm. And they're kind of like travel writing, so narrative non-fiction, and that you can be quite impressionistic if you think of any sort of travel writing. And I found then that I actually loved writing. I actually liked the process of writing, not just the idea of being a writer or, you know, having the book on the shelf sort of thing. And the other thing I realized from that is I could actually do it. You know, writing a book seems like an enormous thing, and in many ways it is. But once you've done it once or twice, you know it is a finite process that as you sit down to write the first words, you know, a year or two's time, you're probably going to have a finished result, you know, probably. So, and that's why the third thing I found from that process was there was no money in it. So if I was going to, so with that, now this is true. Okay, so the average annual income of a published author in Australia is something like $13,000 a year. And I know, Heather, you're now one of the most successful authors in Australia, but you're probably 3 or 4 books in, right, before you could, you know, afford to write full time.
7 books in.
7 books.
7 books.
The Museum of Modern Love, right?
And only because of the prizes, yeah.
Yeah. So why are you writing books then? Because you love writing books, which is what I did with Scrublands. I had a really demanding job, but I was mainly doing video production more than writing, and I missed writing. So I thought, I'm just going to write some fiction because I like doing it. And I've been fortunate. You know, the books have done very well. I mean, I was completely shocked. I was more shocked than anybody else. But that's the real secret behind it, is that I just found that I like writing stuff. And I've also found now that I like writing fiction more than I like writing nonfiction, because one, I get to have the fun of just making stuff up. But there's also always kind of a sense there. You can, so in some ways, there's more truth in fiction than there is in nonfiction, because in nonfiction you do have to stick to the facts and reality to some extent. So no, it took me a long time to get here, Heather, but yeah, I've just found out that I do love writing and I do love words.
Thank you for joining us. I'm delighted. And also let me say that I know Chris's book, The River, and his other nonfiction book, The Coast, are exceptionally good. And Chris did the beautiful thing of sending my dad a copy of The River because he's a big fan of the Murray-Darling, and he loved it. And, you know, you're an extremely accomplished writer in both forms, but I'm very glad you're sticking to fiction because I'm a fan. So the first of our questions is from Anne, and she says, of your 3 books, which was the hardest to write? I suspect I know the answer to that. And this is such a good question. Who is your favourite character to write, Martin or Mandalay?
Okay. The most difficult, Scrublands, I didn't know what I was doing. So it took a lot of drafts and a lot of efforts before I finally got it semi-right. Silver, in a way, was quite difficult because suddenly I had a tight time frame. And in some ways, I'm glad I did have a tight time frame. My publisher, also Heather's publisher, the wonderful Jane Palfreyman, had said after Scrublands came out, it would be good to have a new book by next year. And so I had quite a tight time frame. That's what made it difficult more than anything else. I think in some ways, Trust has been the easiest of the 3. And I think that's probably because I'm just getting better at some of the craft skills and getting a little bit more efficient in the process. And the second question was the character.
Mandalay or Martin?
Oh, actually, writing Mandalay was a bit tricky. I mean, people will ask, you know, is it hard for a man to write a female character? That wasn't the issue. The issue was that she's somewhat a fractured person and she's in denial about her past. So yeah, you can't just say that as a writer. You've got to communicate it more subtly in her own actions and her own thoughts and whatever. So in that regard, it was a bit more challenging, but because of that, more rewarding. I think as a writer, I don't want to write the same book twice. I want to try new things. I'm really glad that in Trust I went with the dual points of view. It makes it quite a different book than the first two. I think people who like the first two books will like Trust. It's just like technically and whatever, it's a different challenge. So, but in the end, I've got to say I'm pretty fond of both of them.
Yeah, and I think that shows as well. I actually loved the way that you did that, because for those of us who have come with them all the way through Scrublands and then through Silver, it felt completely right to get both characters, because it's as if we wanted more to know Mandalay by then, much more too. Like it felt, the connection with her felt much deeper as we moved through Silver, even though she's so interesting in Scrublands. And then this one was, it fulfilled a need somehow, I think, for the reader, because it gave us so much more, not just insight, but a deepening and a roundening of why they fit together, why it works. And the thing is that, I love that we have these expressions as writers that we're either plotters or pantsers. So we either are the people who plot everything from beginning to end, and then we write it, or we're flying by the seat of our pants, and both you and I are a seat of the pantsers. But I loved the way, as we move through Trust, that it begins to be more and more evident why these two people fit with each other, and why they've chosen each other. And I think that the way you've progressed that through the three books, even though it's by the seat of your pants, is beautifully intuitive, Chris. It really is.
So I think you just sort of referred to there something that's sort of really apropos, which was, you were saying that the readers wanted to know more about Mandy. So really, I was in the same frame mind as the readers, saying, oh, there's more to this person. I want to know more about it, in just the same way as the reader might. So so she started off, oh, I'm getting a sign saying my internet's unstable. I hope you're not losing me here. No. So I was very much on the same page, if you like, as the reader, thinking, oh, okay, it's time to know more about her.
Yeah, perfect. So we have a question. We've got just probably time for the last one's quick, so I'll take Laura's next. Chris, all your three books have such unique murders and killings. I'll never forget the massacre at the start of Scrublands. I'll never, in Trust, let me say. How do you decide on how much detail to share with the reader? And do you ever think you take it too far and have to rewrite?
Often violence, this is a really good question.
It's a great question, isn't it? Yeah.
About the depiction of violence, and you could have a whole session on it. Often violence suggested is more powerful than violence described in detail. So for example, in Scrublands, there's a point where Martin has the opportunity to find out about a particularly horrific crime, and he decides he just doesn't want to know. But in a sense, he's then letting me not describe the horror of that crime. And the real reason though, is it doesn't take the story any further. It would just become, well, it would probably slow the pace, but it would just become this rather gratuitous sort of titillation or whatever for people who are into violence. It's a really good question. So in Trust, there's a couple of very dramatic scenes, violent scenes. I wonder about that. I think most people will be fine, but there will probably be some readers who will go, "Oh, that was a bit much for me." They're very short. You don't want to linger, but sometimes you can write a lot of violence and it has no effect because it can be quite cartoonish. So some thrillers are very much like that. Or movies, some movies, if you counted up all the people the hero shoots,
Tarantino, for example.
Hundreds. Or, well, Tarantino does it in a different way. But no, it's a good question, and it is something that should always be considered, and particularly there's been a lot of discussion about violence against women in books. I don't accept the argument that it should just not happen in books, because that would then have the effect of whitewashing what is actually a serious issue in our society. But it's almost a question that there's no full answer to.
Yeah, I agree. But as a person who really dislikes violence, and in fact, I don't read crime fiction normally because I don't want to be horrified, and I find that you do that very well, that it's never overwhelming, and it's, as you say, you can kind of skip across it and move on with the characters and the plot and trying to solve it. And no, I think you make that balance beautifully, Chris. Chris, really last question from Jane, who would like to know, have you started your new book?
I've started working on one yet. So my idea is not to have Martin or Mandy as the point of view characters, but have a book written in the same universe. And what I mean by that is set now in a contemporary Australia, but maybe told from the point of view of some of the minor characters, or the characters that have been minor characters in the first 3 books, elevate them, or maybe have a new character as a point of view character, but have some of those reoccurring characters come back. So maybe even Martin and Mandy in more minor roles, but not point of view roles. So it's a familiar feel to the book. And so I'm thinking of a similar sort of book. I'm not thinking I'm going to write a fantasy book or a horror book or anything like that. It'd be the same sort of contemporary crime book. But that's what I'm thinking at the moment. Yeah.
I like that. We're getting a bigger world. I think that's very exciting. I look forward to seeing what you do with it. Chris, we have to wind up. So it's been my great pleasure to talk to you tonight. Thank you very much for joining us for this event for the Geelong Regional Libraries.
Thank you so much, Heather. So generous of you, and your words have been so kind. And thank you to everyone who's tuned in and listened to us. I appreciate it very much.
And of course, I'd like to thank Steve and Phoebe, who have been our tech support here tonight. Really appreciate their work in making all this so seamless. And we would love you, of course, to now go and buy Chris's books. So you've got the 3 of them. You can start with Scrublands. You can actually start with any of them, but they are in order: Scrublands, Trust, and Scrublands Silver, of course, and Trust. And Chris and I are big supporters of our local bookshops. So we know it's been an extremely hard year for bookshops and indeed for all of us in the creative industry. So please support your local bookshops and support your Australian writers. The government has spectacularly failed to do so. So please do what you can when you think of your Christmas lists to support Australian writers. And thank you to Alan and Unwin also for their support of both of us in our careers, and of course in publishing so many brilliant Australian writers. So thank you again, everyone, for being here tonight. And remember that if you would like to share this video, it will be up on the Geelong Library YouTube site, say by Monday. Thank you again. Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.